For years, Kaliningrad has been one of Russia's most important military pressure points in Europe, a heavily armed enclave wedged between NATO members Poland and Lithuania. But on August 18, the skies around this Russian stronghold became the center of an extraordinary display of NATO air power. Dozens of Allied aircraft reportedly operated across the region, combining stealth fighters, electronic warfare platforms, intelligence aircraft, command and control assets, and aerial tankers. The message was unmistakable: NATO can watch Kaliningrad, penetrate its electronic environment, and coordinate a complex operation directly from the alliance's eastern flank. And that matters because Kaliningrad is not just another Russian territory. It hosts the Baltic Fleet and contains some of Moscow's most important missile and air defense capabilities in the region. At the center of the operation was a NATO E-3A AWACS aircraft, effectively acting as the airborne command center. From high above northern Poland, it could coordinate the movements of numerous aircraft and build a detailed picture of activity across the Baltic region. Then came one of the most closely watched elements, the U.S. Air Force EA-37B Compass Call electronic warfare aircraft. The aircraft had been operating in the Middle East before being deployed to Poland. Its role is fundamentally different from that of a conventional fighter. Instead of destroying targets with missiles, it attacks the invisible systems that allow modern militaries to communicate, detect, coordinate, and fight. For roughly 2 hours, the aircraft reportedly operated west of Kaliningrad. At the same time, intelligence platforms were collecting information across the electromagnetic spectrum. U.S. Army intelligence aircraft such as Artemis II are designed to locate and analyze electronic signals, helping commanders understand what is happening on the ground without necessarily seeing the target directly. Then came the F-35As. American and Norwegian F-35s brought another layer to the operation. Their importance is not simply their ability to remain difficult to detect. Their sensors can collect information from multiple sources, combine it, and distribute that information across the battle space. In a conflict, that could allow NATO forces to identify weaknesses in Russian radar coverage before conventional aircraft ever enter the most dangerous airspace. But sophisticated aircraft cannot remain overhead indefinitely without support. That is where the tankers entered the picture. American, Italian, and NATO aerial refueling aircraft created a logistical bridge in the sky, allowing fighters and other platforms to remain operational for longer periods without constantly returning to their bases. The result was something larger than a routine fighter patrol. It was a demonstration of a networked military system: fighters, electronic warfare, surveillance, command aircraft, intelligence platforms, and tankers working together. And the operation did not stop in the air over Poland. Farther north, NATO surveillance activity extended into the maritime domain. British P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft and German military aircraft monitored areas around the North Sea and Skagerrak. These waters are strategically important because they form one of the key maritime gateways connecting the North Sea to the Baltic. Sonobuoys and other sensors can help aircraft search for submarines and track vessels beneath and on the surface. That means NATO was not simply watching Kaliningrad. It was also monitoring the routes through which Russian naval forces could move in and out of the Baltic. This is where the broader strategic picture begins to emerge. Kaliningrad is often described as a Russian fortress. It contains systems designed to deny NATO access to large portions of the surrounding air and maritime environment. But the same geography that makes the enclave strategically valuable also creates a major vulnerability. Kaliningrad is separated from mainland Russia. Its only land connection to the rest of Russia effectively depends on the narrow Suwałki corridor between Poland and Lithuania. In a major conflict, control of that corridor would become one of Europe's most critical military questions. If NATO could deny Russia access through the corridor while simultaneously controlling the surrounding Baltic maritime environment, Kaliningrad could become increasingly difficult for Moscow to reinforce. And the strategic situation has changed dramatically since Finland and Sweden joined NATO. The Baltic Sea is no longer surrounded by a mixture of neutral and NATO states in the way it was during much of the Cold War. NATO now has a far stronger geographic position around Russia's Baltic territories. That does not mean Kaliningrad is helpless. Far from it. Russia has invested heavily in the enclave, including advanced air defense systems, missile forces, electronic warfare capabilities, and naval assets. But NATO's August activity appears designed to test precisely how that defensive network functions. The issue is not simply who has more missiles. It is who can detect the other side first, disrupt its communications, fuse intelligence faster, and maintain aircraft in the battlespace longer. That is why electronic warfare has become so important. A modern military can have powerful missiles and advanced aircraft, but if its radars are confused, its communications disrupted, and its command networks degraded, its combat effectiveness can fall dramatically. The EA-37B Compass Call represents this new battlefield. It attacks the nervous system rather than the muscles. And this is happening against a backdrop of increasing Russian naval activity. Russian frigates such as Admiral Kasatonov and other major vessels have operated in the Baltic after moving through the North Sea. The concern is particularly focused on ships capable of carrying advanced weapons, including Russia's Zircon hypersonic missile. Zircon has become one of Moscow's most heavily promoted strategic weapons because of its speed and maneuverability. But Russia's naval posture involves more than surface ships. The appearance of the Khabarovsk nuclear submarine has also drawn attention. The submarine is associated with Russia's Poseidon nuclear-powered underwater drone program. Poseidon is designed as a long-range nuclear weapon capable of traveling underwater toward distant targets. The system is intended to complicate traditional missile defense calculations because it does not follow the familiar trajectory of a ballistic missile. Its strategic purpose is therefore as much psychological as military, reminding NATO that Russia retains unconventional nuclear options even when its conventional forces face pressure. This is part of the larger escalation cycle. Ukraine's attacks against Russian naval infrastructure, including the reported August 12 strike on Novorossiysk, have placed additional pressure on Moscow's Black Sea Fleet. Russia has struggled to maintain the same freedom of action it once enjoyed in the Black Sea. That makes the Baltic increasingly important as a theater for signaling Russian military strength. Moscow can demonstrate naval power there. NATO can respond with air power, surveillance, and electronic warfare. Neither side necessarily needs to fire a shot for the strategic competition to intensify. And that may be the most dangerous part. The next stage could be dominated by gray zone warfare. Russia could increase GPS interference across the Baltic, intensify electronic warfare activity, conduct more missile exercises around Kaliningrad, or increase naval patrols. NATO, meanwhile, could expand air defense deployments, strengthen the Suwalki corridor, increase fighter rotations, and deploy additional electronic warfare and intelligence platforms. The battlefield would remain largely invisible. Aircraft would map radar emissions. Satellites would track movements. Signals intelligence would search for changes in Russian communications. Cyber and electronic warfare systems would attempt to disrupt command networks. And autonomous drones could increasingly monitor the borders. This is why reports of a possible NATO strategy built around multiple phases have attracted attention. The concept described in German media involves first degrading Russian air defenses and missile systems, then creating heavily monitored unmanned zones along vulnerable borders. And ultimately threatening Russia's military logistics and infrastructure with long-range precision capabilities. Whether every element of that reported concept becomes actual NATO doctrine is another question. But the underlying trend is unmistakable. NATO is increasingly preparing for a battlefield in which air power, drones, satellites, electronic warfare, artificial intelligence, and long-range precision weapons operate as one interconnected system. The objective is not necessarily to invade Russia. The objective is deterrence through the ability to neutralize Russia's ability to project military power beyond its borders. That distinction is crucial. The more credible NATO's ability to respond becomes, the more difficult it becomes for Moscow to believe that a limited attack against an Eastern NATO member could remain limited. And there is another audience watching all of this very carefully, China. Beijing is studying how NATO responds when a major military confrontation develops on Europe's eastern flank. The lessons extend far beyond Kaliningrad. They involve logistics, satellite intelligence, electronic warfare, autonomous systems, air defense, maritime surveillance, and the speed at which a multinational alliance can combine information and military power. That could become particularly important in the Indo-Pacific. If NATO can integrate dozens of aircraft, satellites, intelligence networks, naval platforms, and electronic warfare systems into a single operational picture, Beijing will naturally examine what that says about Western military coordination in a future crisis involving Taiwan. The deeper message is that modern military power is no longer measured only by tanks, ships, or missile numbers. It is measured by connectivity. Who sees first? Who understands the information first? Who can disrupt the enemy's network first? And who can keep operating after the first wave of attacks? That is the real contest now unfolding around Kaliningrad. Russia built the enclave to function as a strategic spearhead into Europe. NATO increasingly sees the same territory as a vulnerability that can be isolated, monitored, and contained. The geography has not changed. The balance around it has. Finland and Sweden are now NATO members. Poland is reinforcing its eastern defenses. The Baltic states are deeply integrated into the alliance. NATO aircraft are operating with increasingly sophisticated intelligence and electronic warfare capabilities. At the same time, Russia continues to signal that it possesses weapons capable of creating catastrophic consequences. That creates a dangerous paradox. The stronger each side becomes at deterrence, the more carefully each side must manage escalation. One miscalculation involving a fighter, a surveillance aircraft, a naval vessel, or an electronic warfare system could create a crisis neither side originally intended. So the August 18th operation matters not because NATO suddenly surrounded Kaliningrad in a literal military blockade. It matters because it demonstrated something more subtle. NATO can assemble a highly integrated force around Russia's most sensitive Baltic territory and combine stealth aircraft, electronic warfare, intelligence collection, command and control, maritime surveillance, and aerial refueling into one coordinated picture. Russia, meanwhile, is responding with naval deployments, hypersonic weapons, nuclear signaling, electronic warfare, and strategic submarines. The Baltic is therefore becoming something far more consequential than a regional military theater. It is becoming a laboratory for the future of warfare. The next confrontation may not begin with a missile launch. It could begin with a radar disappearing from a screen. A GPS signal suddenly failing. A communications network going silent. A drone appearing where it should not be. Or an aircraft quietly entering an area while hundreds of sensors track its every movement. That is the new contest over Kaliningrad. And the question now is not whether NATO and Russia are watching each other. They clearly are. The real question is who will blink first, and how far the other side will go if it does not.